Congress is on recess, but many of its members are escalating their confrontation with Donald Trump tonight, with new Democrats now endorsing impeachment. Take a look at these numerical facts as they add up. Back during the very first vote to impeach Trump, when Republicans ran the House in 2017, you see there about 30% of Dems voted to impeach. When that same bill came back to the floor last month from Congressman Al Green, the number jumped to about 40% of Democrats. And now, with new Democrats endorsing impeachment tonight, the figure has already now jumped for the first time to 49%, or 114 Democrats. What you're looking at may be a new center of gravity for a caucus that has largely stopped short of advocating impeaching Trump. And the House shift is part of the context for new pressure on the top Republican in the Senate tonight, Mitch McConnell. He's been blocking a series of election security bills despite warnings from Bob Mueller and U.S. intelligence that Russia is still at it. Some have dubbed him Moscow Mitch, progressive groups running billboards in his home state of Kentucky. Plus, there are these provocative images, this one going viral on social media, imagining McConnell in a Russian military uniform. Now, McConnell has taken to the Senate floor to protest exactly that kind of politicking, stressing his past opposition to Putin and arguing this is basically Red Scare tactics against him. Meanwhile, there's reporting that he is genuinely fuming about all this, a contrast to his embrace of other Democratic nicknames like the Grim Reaper.
For the first time in my memory, I agree with Nancy Pelosi. I am indeed the Grim Reaper.
The accusation that I'm, quote, un-American was broadcast on MSNBC. I don't normally take the time to respond to critics in the media. This modern-day McCarthyism is toxic.
I'm joined now by U.S. Senator Richard Blumenthal from the Judiciary Committee. His election security bill would require federal campaigns to report offers of any foreign assistance. It is one of the proposals blocked by McConnell. I'm also joined by Malcom, Nance, former counterintelligence operative from the U.S. military. Good evening to both of you.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
Senator, let's get to the bill. But first, I got to ask, does the senator have a point in his criticism as he mentioned the media? He mentioned MSNBC. He mentioned what he views as McCarthyism. Is any of this out of bounds in your view or no?
The plain fact is we have no idea why Mitch McConnell has made it his unrelenting business to block these measures. 3 times I've gone to the floor for the Duty Report Act, which requires any campaign, any family member, any candidate to report illegal offers of foreign assistance or acceptance of them, because Donald Trump has said, I take it. His son said during the campaign, I love it. And the reason why he is blocking these measures simply has no explanation. Maybe it relates to the fact that we're seeking greater access to the ballot box for ordinary Americans or ending the impact of big business on those elections. But the simple fact is that he takes pride in being called the Grim Reaper, not so much Moscow Mitch.
Malcolm?
Well, when Joe Scarborough named him Moscow Mitch, he made quite an argument that Mitch McConnell's behaviors were in support, almost direct support, of the strategic objectives outlined in the Mueller report about Russia's attack on the United States and damage to its electoral process. No other person has ever stood for a foreign power to intervene in our elections. And now we find out that in August of 2016, Mitch McConnell was the one that Harry Reid was talking about when he said that there was opposition to naming names as to who was actively attacking the United States. 3 years on, almost to the month, we need to understand whose interest does he work for? Does he work for the people of the United States? Prove it. Defend this nation with your oath of office by giving us the election security we have. Otherwise, that the guerre is going to stick with him.
Well, Senator, we look at what we've learned both from the Mueller report, which Malcolm mentions, as well as some of what we learned from the Senate investigations, and you know all about it, which has to do with whether this is, as Mueller said, ongoing and where it is. I want to put up something that is pretty straightforward. Here is a map of the United States, and here are the states that have been targeted by Russia, according to the Senate report. Eagle-eyed viewers will note every state is red because every single state was targeted. What does that tell us?
What that map tells us is that this effort is ongoing, and as Robert Mueller said, it's ongoing by, quoting him, many other nations. There was a report just last week about the Iranians conducting a disinformation campaign. So it's not just Moscow, it's other foreign governments that want to interfere in our election, and it is perhaps one of the greatest threats to our current national security. Our nation is under attack, and yet the Republicans are blocking common sense measures. They're a matter of simple morality and patriotism. And by the way, common sense is a term overused in this city that displays common sense less often than it should. But these matters ought to be bipartisan, and they would be bipartisan, for the Republican leadership.
And let me press you on that, because part of what we're discussing here is the nature of the attacks on Mitch McConnell, which, as reported, got his attention, but which are impugning him, right? And it was liberals historically who were compared about efforts to tie them to the Red Scare, to tar them, and all these type of things. So you're talking, Senator, about why he opposes it. I want to give Senator McConnell's view here some airtime. He cites several reasons, and this is from reporting: a longstanding resistance to federal control over state elections, right, which is something that many Republicans have talked about pre-Trump. Newly enacted security improvements that were shown, he argues, to have already worked in 2018. And he's suspicious that Democrats, I guess this would be you, sir, are trying to gain some kind of partisan advantage through these proposals. So taking him seriously, what is your response to that? That's not just the Trumpian thing of, oh, can't talk about Russian meddling because it undermines Trump. He's saying, hey, he and Kentucky have had a long skepticism of federal involvement in elections, although some of that's controversial for many other reasons, including civil rights. But your response?
Point by point. First of all, no federal control would result from these measures, certainly not from my Duty to Report Act, not from providing funding for election security. States would continue to control their own elections, not from setting auditing or cybersecurity standards, not from requiring paper ballots, which most states now have. And the states themselves, contrary to what Mitch McConnell said, are asking for this additional funding that we want to provide. Yes, $380 million has been provided, but a lot more is necessary, and a lot more is absolutely a matter of national security. And finally, as for the partisan advantage, these measures would be bipartisan if Mitch McConnell allowed them to be. He needs to lead or get out of the way.
You want him to come to the table. Malcolm, almost out of time. What's the most important thing that you're watching for as people wonder, well, if Mueller said it, are we in trouble? Are we at risk?
Well, the thing that I'm watching for is exactly what Senator Blumenthal said. He needs to show some leadership. And let me give him a little advice as an old Navy chief. Get up and do your job. This nation needs to be defended. It is not partisan to defend the flag. It is not partisan to defend the Constitution. What is it going to take for him to actually understand that this is critical? Will it take the Iranians to have to hack votes against him in the next election and, make him lose his position? That is possible. The North Koreans can do it. The Russians can do it. Anyone can attack us, and leaving us defenseless is just malpractice of the worst sort.
Senator Blumenthal, Malcolm, Nance, thanks to both of you. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.